Welcome to Biomechanics on Our Minds. My name is Melissa Boswell.
And I'm Hannah O'Day, and we're PhD students at Stanford University.
This podcast is brought to you by the International Society of Biomechanics.
It's
time for Boom.
Welcome to Boom, where we have
Biomechanics on our minds.
Boom.
Boom.
Boom, boom, boom,
Boom, boom, boom, boom.
boom.
On today's episode, we're going to be talking with Dr. Mei Liu, who works at Intuitive Surgical, and she will talk about her experience and her current role, as well as some career advice that she has encountered along the way.
But first, a bit of boom.
Bit of boom, Gucci. Bit of boom, Louis. Bit of boom. Bit of boom.
Today's article is from the Journal of Biomechanics. It's titled Muscle Force Estimation in Clinical Gait Analysis Using Antibody and OpenSim by Ursula Trindler and her colleagues at the School of Health Science in the UK and at the Andreas Wensensen Research Institute in Germany. And basically, this is a 2019 journal article, I think, so March 2019. And they seek to compare muscle forces from two different musculoskeletal modeling environments, antibody and OpenSim. And this is really important since a variety of musculoskeletal models are applied in different modeling environments to estimate muscle forces during gait and other functional movements. But there is an effect of different modeling assumptions and approaches on model outputs that we still don't really understand, and there's rarely direct comparisons between different modeling approaches. Typically, people, will just pick one and kind of report the results on that, but often there isn't using both and comparing the results from it.
Oh, so how did they actually compare? What things did they look at?
So they used the experiment were people walking. And so they used the motion capture measurements, basically ran the simulation in antibody and OpenSim, and then compared joint kinematics, joint kinetics, and then the estimated muscle forces.
Oh, cool. So did they find anything surprising or different between them?
Yeah, so they found that there were substantial differences during some phases of the gait cycle regarding muscle force estimations between the two different musculoskeletal modeling approaches. So this highlights the importance of carefully picking what simulation you're going to be using and how you're interpreting the results, and really question the applicability of models for gait analysis. But there was an interesting find that they both had very similar muscle force activation patterns. So not necessarily the same muscle forces, but similar activation patterns.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah. I just thought it was really a good study to see how important it is to compare different models.
Yeah. In a systematic way that, really highlights, the different features of each one. And
yeah, exactly. It's hard to know, though, still why the differences occur, right?
Oh,
so you can see where they're different, but it is hard to know with muscle forces, because you can't really have a ground truth for internal muscle forces. So you can report the differences between them, but then you really have to think about the assumptions the models are making and why that might affect the muscle forces, and you can't really use ground truth data to understand why.
Yeah, it's so hard, right? All we can do is these kind of thorough comparisons and try to see how it's important to see where they're similar, right? Because maybe that gives some strength to...
Right, and you can use them, if different studies look at different aspects. So another study by Sandholm et al. In 2011, they compared the two different anatomical knee joints and then those influence on kinematics, muscle activations, and joint reaction forces during walking. So kind of looking at different musculoskeletal geometry effects simulations. Yeah. It's definitely important to think about what you are looking at specifically and then how the assumptions of a particular model will affect that.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I feel like that exactly is the point of a lot of scientific teaching, is that, like, really know what your question is so that you can pick the appropriate tools to answer it.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a little something extra special before our interview. We have a little boop for you, which is biomechanics on our poetry.
That's where we like our biomechanics sometimes.
So Hannah's going to read a little clip of this part of this poem that we found that used the scientific muscle names in the poem, which I found very inspiring to be able to use biomechanics in a beautiful poem.
Yeah, it just rolls off the tongue.
Sharon Olds writes really beautiful odes to different things, and she writes odes to almost taboo topics as well, and things that people don't generally write odes about. But this one was about how her legs are unmatching, like 2 different sizes. So it's the unmatching legs ode.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay, well, here we ode. All right, so here's an excerpt from Unmatching Legs Ode by Sharon Olds. When I was a new matron, I thought that the blue-green line down my inner calf, the great saphenous vein, was a Nile beauty mark, and the way it rose, when I was carrying my first young, there was something cool in how it fit between the ledges of the gastrocnemius and soleus, like a snake between 2 strata of rock.
End excerpt. So if you want to read the whole poem, you can search Unmatching Legs Ode by Sharon Olds online.
Yeah, and that was really Melissa that found that, so thank you for bringing that bit of
I was listening.
Boop.
I was listening to a podcast she was on, and she read the whole thing, and when she said gastrocnemius and soleus, I was like, whoa, I've never seen gastrocnemius in a poem before. That's pretty cool.
That's amazing. I wonder how many people reading that poem know what the gastrocnemius is.
Yeah. I just feel like it's inspiring. Like, also, muscles are so cool.
Yeah. Also, today I learned that the word fax is not, that's an abbreviation of the actual word.
What?
Right? Didn't you
what
think
do you mean
fax
of
was
the actual
word?
word? Factual?
It's facsimilar. Wait.
That facsimilar is not a word. Facsimilar?
Facsimile.
Facsimile?
That's the real word for fax.
I disagree.
Right? Who knew that?
Is incorrect.
Yeah. And another lab mate, thank gosh, was like, also didn't know this, but everyone else did know this. They thought it was silly that I didn't know that fax wasn't a word. It was, this is the word. I was like,
I think it's absurd that they did know that.
I was like, I've never seen this word in my life. Facsimile.
Facsimile. Okay.
So now you learn that, everyone. There's another. If you
want
to
I was listening to somebody talk, and they were abbreviating attention as attention, and that's like, that's not really the same as this situation, but it really made me laugh. He was like, yeah, I like attention.
I love it.
Now for our interview with Mei Lu. So with us on Boom right now is Mei Lu. She's a principal medical research scientist at Intuitive Surgical. Thanks for being with us today, May.
I'm so excited. Thank you.
We're so excited to have you. So what made you want to be a biomechanist?
Yes. I can remember that moment with incredible clarity. So this was way back when I was in high school. So it would have been around 1992, 1993. And I was a junior, and I was taking an anatomy and physiology class. And we had a fantastic teacher. And I remember he showed us a video, and it must have been from a clip from 60 Minutes or Dateline or some kind of news show that showed a man who was paralyzed in all 4 limbs. So he was a quadriplegic. And he was able to move his hand because of electrodes that had been implanted. And he was able to control those with the minimal neck muscles that he had left, and he was able to feed himself and groom himself. And at that moment I said, that's what I want to do. I want to do something that amazing that helps people in some way that uses technology for good. And so I said, where are they doing that? And they were doing that at Case Western Reserve. So I said, well, that's where I want to go to school. What department? Biomedical engineering. Okay, then that's what I'm going to do.
And did you do that?
And I did. So I studied functional electrical stimulation for my undergrad. And my senior project was around using functional electrical stimulation to help people walk who are paraplegic. Wow. So, and then after that, I decided to go to grad school, and that's how I ended up in biomechanics in grad school too.
Wow. I feel like so few people actually see what they want to do and actually fully follow it. I feel like that's the mark of a true calling.
Well, but then I deviated. I don't do that anymore. Yeah. So, but I think that, all you can know in the moment is that, is like the next step. You can't ever really know what's going to be 5 steps after. All you can know is what is the thing that feels most authentic now, and go for it.
Yeah.
That's great advice.
Yeah, that is great advice. And I feel like knowing that puts a little less pressure on the having to have some final,
for sure. I mean, and it took me a long time to realize that, but I was, I don't know if we want to talk about this, but I was talking to a graduate student from Stanford a few weeks ago, and the question of should I or shouldn't I? Should I get the PhD or shouldn't I? Should I or shouldn't I? And it's you're not going to make a bad decision.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine either way. If you get your master's and go off, you're going to go in one trajectory. If you stick around and get your PhD, you're going to go in another trajectory. And chances are both are going to be great. It just depends on which one you are drawn to and that you choose. You can't really go wrong, I think. So that's my advice.
That's a great point and awesome advice. So in your current role now, can you talk a little bit about what you do there? We saw, we read a little bit about how you explore approaches for training surgeons and surgical teams to use cutting edge technologies. It just sounds like a really interesting role that you have there. So
I'm super flattered that you invited me onto Biomechanics podcast, because I don't even, on the one hand, I don't even really think I do biomechanics anymore. On the other hand, I don't even know how people define biomechanics anymore.
Very broad.
So, I mean, I think that a lot of the work I do starts to verge a little bit into human factors, which is close to biomechanics. But to back it up, so Intuitive Surgical makes the Da Vinci surgical system, which is a medical device that provides robotic-assisted surgical technology for minimally invasive surgery. So you can look it up if you want to see the device itself, but it's an amazing piece of technology, but you still have to learn how to use it, and surgeons have to learn how to use it efficiently and safely and effectively. So a lot of the research that I started off doing at Intuitive when I started there 9 years ago was really to look into how do we quantify that? What does it mean to use this well? And how do we measure the effects of training? And then as I've been at the company longer, I've expanded that scope into how do we look at teams? How do we look at people who are assisting the surgeon? And how do we evaluate teamwork? Now, as the company's gotten bigger, our human factors department has gotten bigger, and other groups have kind of grown up to fill in a lot of the spaces that I used to work in, which is fantastic. But that was the genesis of my work at Intuitive. I started there. I actually was able to leverage my simulation experience that I'd had in grad school. So I was in the neuromuscular biomechanics lab here at Stanford, and I know you've had Professor Delp and a few other alum from that lab on the show. So I was building simulations using OpenSim and all that. So I was able to leverage that when I went to interview at Intuitive, because they were getting ready to release what would become a surgical skills trainer in simulation. So I was able to talk intelligently about simulation, even though it was a completely different kind of simulation. But I still knew more than most people about simulation, and so I was able to pivot into that area, and that's what got me started down the road of assessing technical skill for surgeons.
Wow. It's really amazing how you were able to pivot that skill set, I think.
It was pretty amazing, actually. I'm really lucky.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I don't know, a magic trick. You just like pull it out of your back pocket.
Well, I'll tell you, I was looking for jobs in the aftermath of the Great Recession. So I was looking for a job around 2000. I graduated in 2009, and it took me 18 months to find a job.
Wow.
So it was rough going. And I had interviewed for a different job at Intuitive and didn't get it. And I bombed that interview so hard, it's like, I shouldn't have gotten it. It was good. I was just like, oh my gosh, I screwed that up really bad. But then they had this other position that they brought me back to interview for, and I got it. It was a marketing position.
Whoa.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
That's
That's
one of the
crazy.
things that I think... I think one of the mysteries of industry when you're in grad school is just not really knowing what it is besides this black box of like, there's academia and then there's this unknown void of industry and people disappear into there. And that's all you know. But when I was talking to people in networking and I was saying, well, what I really like to do, because what I'd really loved about, well, one of the many things that I'd really loved about my graduate work was I like knowing what problems people need solved. Like talking to surgeons and finding out, like, how can our simulations help you, and what kind of decisions do you need to make in order to help treat your patients better. And in industry, at least in med device, that actually falls under marketing for the most part.
Whoa.
Interesting.
Yes. Now, I didn't stay in that role for very long because the woman who hired me, who was really good at marketing, ended up leaving the company. Not long after I joined, but then I pivoted, was able to take the work that I did that first year in the marketing position and pivot again internally to research. So I told my new manager, I'm like, look, clearly I don't know much about this marketing stuff. Let's be honest. Clearly I don't know much about this marketing stuff, but all the work we're doing to do all the data capture, to validate this new simulator, we could be doing that in other parts of our training org as well.
Yeah.
We could be looking at other ways to help with assessment and feedback. And that's how I kind of took off into that career trajectory.
Yeah. You were able to find the need within your own company
Yes.
for the skills that you have and what you've learned, which is amazing.
So thank you for sharing all that. We did a little research on your LinkedIn profile.
Okay.
And had some fun.
Yeah, it was really colorful.
We
I
were so
thought.
inspired. We were just like, one, for our listeners that don't have access to a computer, your May's LinkedIn, her cover photo actually has this amazing quote. It looks like a fortune. Is that an actual fortune?
It's from an actual fortune cookie that I got, and that fortune is taped to my monitor at work.
Wow. Wow. So you look at this every day?
Every day.
Okay.
I have a fortune taped to my dashboard in my car, actually. Sometimes you just connect with them.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Would you like to tell us what your fortune on your monitor says?
I think it says you never hesitate to tackle the hardest problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
And it's inspiration sometimes when I feel like I'm dragging. It's like the thing that I've really started saying in meetings when people start to get discouraged. It's like, hey, if this were easy, it would have been done by now.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, we do the hard stuff, and just because it's hard doesn't mean it can't be done. So, yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I guess that kind of leads to one of the questions we had about that quote, and it's like, I guess that's how you motivate other people, but how do you motivate yourself to tackle the hard problems?
That's such a good question. And I think it ebbs and flows for me. I've really learned over the years to understand how to sort of engage my creative, thoughtful mind And also to realize, like, when that artistic, it's like an art. It's like the gift that you bring of analysis or creativity or study design. It's sometimes it's hard to catch, and so sometimes I just have to grind until I'm like, there it is. There's the hypothesis that we need to test. Mm-hmm. There's the study design that we need to have. There's the data type we need to get. Mm-hmm. And the motivation always has to be the same reason that I got into biomechanics in the first place, which is like, hey, there's people out there who need our help. I was listening to some of your past episodes, and I think it was Brian Davis who said he told his students, like, patients are waiting. Patients are waiting, and it's the same thing in the med device industry. Surgeons are waiting. So get it done. That said, sometimes my execution is really slow. I took a strength. You may have heard of the Strengths Finder test.
Oh, yeah.
And I score really high in some of the things like ideation and formulating plans and things like analysis, and I score really low in execution, which is probably why it took me way too long to get my PhD done. It's like it all comes together. It's like, oh, I get it. This isn't my talent.
Well, it's great that you're able to recognize that, and then in your current work, really use your strengths.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I find myself in a role now where I'm doing a bit less hands-on of the actual doing, but I'm more helping other teams figure out what it is they want to do and how they're going to measure it, and then to come back and help them with the analysis. But the actual doing, I don't do so much anymore. And it's a win-win, because I'm just not the best at getting it done anyways. So it's better for someone else to do it.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the things about industry. As I was driving over here from work, I was kind of reflecting on, like, well, because people always ask, like, well, what's the difference between industry and academia and things like that? And certainly the difference, I think, a difference between industry and getting your PhD is, for your PhD, you're becoming this deep subject matter expert, and you know everything there is to know about this topic that you're working on, and you've done the whole thing yourself, which is amazing. And you have this pride of ownership and pride of deep expertise, which is so cool. And in industry, you have teams. And so you don't have to do it all yourself. And in fact, no one can do it all themselves at the kind of scale when you're trying to make a product, much less a regulated one. And so you have the pride of, like, wow, we have an amazing team. Like, we each are bringing our own thing, and I don't have to worry about all that other stuff because there's other people who are handling that. And you can just bring your thing. And then it all comes together in this, like, stressful magic. And it's cool.
Wow.
That's great. You also mentioned on your profile that the gray areas are where you thrive. And you've kind of talked about this a bit, really being able to find the holes, but also maybe where some disciplines overlap. And we were wondering what your favorite gray problem has been.
That's such a good question. I really do get drawn to the gray areas because that's where the hard stuff is. I mean, that's where biomechanics is. It's in these overlaps of, like, well, is it biology? Is it engineering? But clearly there's an overlap. And how do we sort that out? And how do we communicate? So my favorite gray area.
You can do favorite or least favorite.
Yeah.
It's easier to talk
But, one of the things that has been really exciting for me as a sort of a professional, like, not even professional growth, but just sort of learning experience on my career is that a couple years ago I worked on a project with our human resources department. Had nothing to do with bio anything. It had to do with leadership skills assessment. Because how do we know if our leaders are proficient? And so I was asked to help with this project because I have expertise, and I've developed a reputation within the company for knowing how to write surveys because I had to learn how to do that for some earlier projects. So I helped build this questionnaire and this really, what to me feels like this gray area of trying to quantify this almost personal characteristic of like, what does it mean to be a good leader? How would you know if someone's a good leader? How do you measure that? And it was really, really interesting. So there's just gray areas everywhere. Like anywhere there's not an answer is gray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, for some reason, that just reminded me of like this this initiative in the design school here, where they created like a puzzle bus, which is like, you know, you've heard of escape rooms and things that. So it's like essentially a mobile escape room that they took to schools to assess kids on these qualitative aspects like teamwork, collaboration, listening to others, things that it's hard to quantify with, like, how do you quantify that other than like just through qualitative observation? And so with this like puzzle bus, they were able to do that. And it's almost like you need one of those for industry for figuring
we could
out.
Put all of our executives into a
In an
puzzle
escape
bus
room.
and see if they can get out.
Yeah.
I will suggest that to our HR department.
So, you know, but yeah, it's that fun creative ability, I feel like, that you mentioned earlier, and being able to come at problems with your skill sets and think of them in different ways, and building, like you said, you had developed surveys earlier in your career, and like I think being able to draw on those skill sets and never think of anything as like wasted time really
Exactly.
is huge. Yeah.
And I think I was thinking again on the drive over about skill sets, and I think one of the hardest things that I've seen for especially graduate students who are trying to move into industry, if they're coming out of a BME or biomechanics program, is identifying the skills that are applicable.
Yeah.
And I had the same thing. And it's really because a lot of our strongest skills that we bring are what you might call soft skills. It's the ability to identify problems. It's the ability to come up with rigorous, like, engineering analytical approaches to anything. And that's where I think the biomechanics part is what kind of sets this discipline off from traditional engineering or traditional biology. One of the things that I loved best about my biomedical engineering undergrad program was like, oh my gosh, we can use circuit theory to model cell membranes, or, you know, spring mass dampers to model muscles. So to just be able to apply these basic models of where you can have a pretty, you know, you can analytically model them to anything. So I think that is this really intangible skill set that biomechanics does bring, that just really has pushed people who are in the field to just think very differently. But it's hard to put that on your resume.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
We would endorse you on LinkedIn for that skill. Yeah, very well said. Do you think that's really where your interview has to kind of come in to supplement that? I don't know.
If you're trying to move into industry,
right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's gonna. I didn't believe it when I started looking for a job in industry, but it's true. It's networking. Everyone hates it. Everyone thinks that it must apply to everyone except for themselves. They're like, well, that's probably good for someone else, but I have this rock star resume. And it's like, no, these days it's really going to, especially if you're trying to get into a very competitive company where a lot of people are trying to go, it's going to be networking. And then it's going to be those soft skills and the ability to communicate, like, your passion and your enthusiasm and what you love. And that's going to be the type of thing where someone's going to be like, I could work next to this person for 5 years or more, because that's what we're hiring. We're hiring colleagues. Like, do I want to, like, this person may be brilliant, but oh my gosh, they're driving me nuts. Like, I don't want to work next to that person. Yeah. So the informational interview or the formal interview is really where to let yourself shine.
Thank you. That's a good tip.
Yeah.
And You can edit this out if you don't want it, but this is my own personal this is my own personal thing. Like my soapbox that I get on is be thoughtful of the resume you're sending out. If you're going to be sending resumes to people, be thoughtful if they want your CV or a resume. Because,
if they even want it.
Yeah, it's that what you hear about people spending 5 seconds on a resume is absolutely true.
Yeah.
And if I'm like scrolling through 11 pages of an academic CV, I'm like, what is this person about? Do they even know? Like they just, I'm like, what am I supposed to do with all this information? So I would suggest having both. Have your academic CV and then have no more than a 2-page resume. My resume is 1 page. I just slashed and hacked and condensed it down to 1 page that still has a lot of white space because it's just an introduction. It's not the whole thing. It's enough to get you. It's enough to get you a call of curiosity, like, oh, tell me more. Not like, oh, tell me about that random publication that I don't even know what it means because it's not relevant to this job.
And that 1 page, you still tailor to different companies depending on position. Very cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. It's almost like you're handing in your a report from everything you did in your PhD to someone and just saying you figure out what was important.
Exactly. That's what the long one feels like. I'm like, is there anything in this thesis that's relevant to the job that you want to do? I don't know. Yeah. And that's where you're going to get into trouble. Yeah. Not being able to articulate the skills that you used. The other thing that I found was really useful, again, when I was job hunting, I used to have a 2-page, like, super dense resume because I just used small font and I was just, like, cramming everything in.
Might be guilty of.
I was like, look, it's only 2 pages. You can't read it, but it's only 2 pages. Once I switched to the 1-pager, I could use it as a point of conversation with a recruiter. So if I went to a job fair, I could hold it up and be like, and I could point to items on it and be like, look, here I did this, and in this class I did this, and da-da-da-da-da, rather than like this blinding small print.
Right. Do you have your resume anywhere to look at, or are there examples that you thought, or is this just something that kind of happened naturally for you?
I read a book. Because, man, it was desperate times. It was 18 months trying to find a job. And I read this book, I think, and I mean, now it's, 10 or 12 years old, but I think it was called, like, What Do You Have to Do to Get a Job Around Here? Or something like that. And she really, the author really advocated for this 1-pager. She's like, it's a billboard, not a memoir. Yeah. You know, it's enough to get people interested and to show that you're organized and thoughtful and have discipline. Not just, whoa, here's everything I've ever done. You decide what to do with it.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
You can see on my LinkedIn profile, I'm much more verbose.
That's where you get to throw everything.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, I don't have that kind of discipline on my LinkedIn.
Actually, one of my favorite, the line just right after your name says, asking what if, why not? What's the inspiration for that?
Again, I used to just have my title there, but then I was like, no one knows what that means anyways. What is principal medical research science? Nobody knows what that means.
It just sounds really important.
It sounds
like we know you're.
I don't know. Does it? I don't know. No one knows what it means. I don't really. I don't do medicine. I don't know. I was just thinking about what it put there, and they call it your little headline. And I was like, man, I feel like this is the question that constantly comes up for me when I'm in discussions with colleagues. It's like, well, what if we did that? And why not? And there's often a really good reason why not. But until that's been articulated, you're lacking information. It's like, no, seriously, tell me why not. Oh, okay, now I know, and we can pivot. Or like maybe there isn't a good reason why not. Often why not is just like, well, that's hard. Like, well, again,
I don't want to.
Then it comes back to, well, we're here to solve hard problems. So, no, that is, it's just, I don't know, the what if, why not, it just, And again, I guess it's a little bit of inspiration for me too.
Yeah.
I have a little sticker on my laptop next to the touchpad that just says "Begin Anywhere," because sometimes, again, it's getting that first sentence on the page or that first data point or whatever that just is enough to get you hooked into that flow.
Yeah. And the hardest part is starting a lot of the
It
time.
is, man.
It's like, you're so
Finishing
scared
is
of the
also
wall.
hard.
Oh, yeah. Starting's hard. Yeah. I know that feeling, yeah.
How much longer do y'all have? I mean, and you can say 2 years. Everyone always just says 2 years.
Yeah, few years.
We're like, we're 4th years plus or minus.
Well, I'm a third year.
Oh, you're a 3rd year.
I'm still young.
You're right. She's still young and restless. And
That's awesome.
So yeah, probably a few years.
Yeah.
I think the average
I'm
is
aiming for
around
2.
6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Excellent.
6 is for our.
Get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the goal. That's what I should have
That's what
above
everyone keeps
or
saying, yeah.
sticker on my laptop. Get her done. So one question that we always ask is, what has been a research fail? And I don't know, this could be not necessarily just in research, but sometime where you're like, man, that could have gone a lot better.
Yeah, this one I was thinking about that too, and I was like, man, like I said, I've moved away from doing a lot of hands-on research, but the thing that sticks out to me is like, man, I learned a lesson from that one. Was a project I did a few years ago, and I had, I think one of the things that people underestimate often about people who work in the med device industry or just companies in med device is that there's actually a lot of really smart people in med device industry. And we read the literature. Like, we keep up to date on what's being published. We keep up to date with research. It's a part of our jobs. And so I had seen this peer-reviewed article published that was a semi-objective, semi-subjective rating scale matrix for observation-based scoring of a surgeon using our device. So right up my alley. I'm like, oh, how are they measuring this? And I read it, and I'm like, we could do better. There's so much. I looked at it, I'm like, this is an incremental improvement on a previously developed scale, and I'm like, yeah, it's fine. The data are great, but we could do better. And so I spent probably 2 years working with our internal experts and subject matter experts to develop this other scale. It was really good. And then I tested it with like a small but sufficient sample size. I was like up at 5 a.m. in the morning, handling pig intestine to set up the lab so people could manipulate the pig intestine and do the thing and all the stuff. And I got the data, and I worked with a statistician to crunch the data. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we got some interesting stuff here. And I realized, and I got set to publish it. And I made this huge mistake of not knowing the audience and not appreciating how hard it was going to be to publish in a clinical journal when you're from industry. And I just got rejection after rejection. I managed to get it into a conference, and then the year after that conference explicitly stopped accepting submissions from industry.
Wow.
I think because I kind of threw them for a loop because it was good. And then after that, they're like, oh, we shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
And I just got these rejections where the reviewers flat out said this was an industry-sponsored project. We shouldn't publish it.
Okay, so it's more like they might have other...
They were concerned. They were concerned about bias, even though the project itself we weren't selling, we weren't promoting. It was very straightforward. It was completely replicable. We weren't using any proprietary information. It was just a project, and it bummed me out. I mean, I finally did get it published, but it's pretty much never cited. It's never used. So I was like, well, shoot, it was a good project. I spent a lot of time on it. I learned a lot, but I just didn't appreciate how hard it was going to be to publish, and that, and without publishing it, it's just not going to go anywhere.
Right.
So that was a big learning.
What are you most excited about for the future of biomechanics, or I guess medical devices?
Again, I was thinking, I don't even know what biomechanics is anymore, because if I was like, well, it seems to be the application of traditional mechanical engineering concepts to biological systems, but even like mechanical engineering is expanding, or engineering, and I think what's really exciting, and I'm sure you've had other guests say this, I'm sure this is nothing new, is the variety, like the scale, like getting smaller and smaller, and how do we get into more like potentially cellular manipulation or understanding cellular or molecular mechanics, and just the ability to scale those insights into larger, at a little more macro level, I think is exciting. How do we prevent problems rather than wait for them to become problems? I was at a conference in Boston a few weeks ago about the future of medicine, and one of the things that really stuck in my head was like they said, hey, right now we take this really kind of defensive position against medicine where we wait for there to be a problem. We wait till you need surgery. We wait until you need a medication to intervene. What if we could just prevent that from ever having to happen? Because we're going to be able to predict. We're going to be able to predict whether this type of disability or something's going to happen, and we can just intervene so early that it never happens. Isn't that way better than just waiting for there to be a problem?
Yeah.
So I think that biomechanics could totally have a role in that. I think also that I'm using scare quotes of big data, whatever that means, but it's true. I mean, we are in the midst of an exciting and sometimes scary and very gray area of using all sorts of amazing sensors to be able to draw correlations about things that you might never have predicted, and to be able to do so reliably, and to be able to do really profound analytics, which is exciting and scary, I think. One of the speakers I heard recently at another conference about the future of medicine talks about the digital exhaust that we all put off, basically from all of our devices. Smart homes, smartphones, we're just social media, we're just creating all this data that's just going out there. And it may be tremendously useful. Wearables, between wearables, your smart home, your smartphone, and your online presence.
Yeah.
And it's just all stuff you're putting out there, which again, in some hands could be tremendously useful to be able to be like, oh my gosh, you should go see your doctor.
Yeah.
Or it could be used for not so, great purposes. So
right. But I like your idea of being able to track both, physical health you can do with wearables, but also mental health through your interactions with social media and other things that you're putting out there. I think mental health is an exciting
space. I heard about a study where they can, I think they had a pretty good rate of diagnosing or identifying depression in someone's voice, not because of the content they were saying, but of the waveforms, just like the way they were talking, their speech patterns rather than their speech content. They were able to identify if someone had depression.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're just making data all the time.
I swear we could do that. Yeah, Scott, the head of the neuromuscular biomechanics lab here, he talks about, the emotions that we evoke when we walk. And, I think that, is, a wearable haven.
Exactly.
I feel like a comic needs to be made where it's just I'm exhausted from a long day of making so much data.
Right? Exactly.
Now, soon it'll be not a carbon footprint, but like your data footprint. Right?
Yeah, actually, I've heard that there's will be libraries where you can go.
Whoa.
Like if you're not around anymore, somebody who wants to go talk to you can talk to
that's so Black Mirror.
like a digital.
There's a Black Mirror episode about that.
But this was a podcast where this man was a researcher was very serious that this is like something that's happening now, that you have a digital presence that can be kind of recreated and people can have conversations with your digital self, and you'll respond in ways that you would.
I think I heard that too. I think I heard a researcher, I think I know the name, but I don't want to misquote, so I won't say, but it was a man, he's building an artificial intelligence of himself with the idea that after he's gone, that he'll still be around.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Which again is like cool scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those, like, you want to just, like, be like, that is so amazing, but then something holds you back a little tiny bit. And you're like,
Well, I think that's another thing that, with the future of biomedicine is like, man, ethics
Ethics.
Oh, yeah,
is
that's
coming in a big way. Ethics and the law are coming in. At this conference in Boston, they were talking about a lawsuit that was, I don't know if it was in Massachusetts or not, but there was a person who had a home health nurse to come in and help them for like 4 hours a week. Well, then the service providers, artificial intelligence or machine learning, whatever, they had an algorithm that said, oh, this person really only needs an hour a week of home health care.
Wow.
Which might be true according to whatever inputs they're using. But then the family sued, and now it's in court. And all that, they're saying, well, our algorithm is proprietary. And as you probably know, a lot of machine learning isn't human interpretable anyways.
So were they suing because they thought they were coming too often and like charging them more than they should be, or what were they?
No, I think
upset
they
about?
were suing because the implication was that they were going to lose 3 hours of care.
Oh, okay.
And they're like, hey, how are you justifying this?
I see.
When we were doing really well with 4 hours of care, how are you justifying this?
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, what's going to happen?
yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's like, well, we can't show you because it's in that black box.
or we don't even know because
Yeah.
it's the black box.
Yeah.
And maybe they need to retrain their models. I mean, I think that's the other thing. Like, it's very exciting, all this stuff in machine learning, but how these models are trained is critically important in terms of bias and generalizability of the results.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. If people listening want to follow your work,
There's nothing to follow. I don't.
there's nothing to
publish.
follow. Are you on like Twitter or anything like
Not.
that? Okay.
I'm socially unmediated. I don't know. I'm not socially not on social media.
Well, they
really.
can look on your
They
LinkedIn
can
page.
look on my LinkedIn page.
You're going to get a lot of LinkedIn messages.
I know. That's I'm usually open to doing an informational interview. I cannot guarantee you that I can get you a job. I'm sorry, but I appreciate you wanting to get a job.
You heard that on the air, everyone.
Well, thank you, May. This was a really great conversation, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
I know there wasn't too much of biomechanics in it, but I enjoyed it.
No, this
So did
is
we.
exactly what Boom is about.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks a lot to May for joining us on Boom today. It was really inspiring to hear all her different stories and how open she is to approaching problems just full on, especially the gray ones.
Why not? Do we have a research fail for today?
Oh, how did I forget?
Research fails. Yes, it does.
Last month we heard about a plant biologist, but this month we're going to hear about my friend who's a microbiologist and offered to share her research fail. And she details her first day in lab when she's like trying to make a good impression on everyone. She actually ended up using these really smelly chemicals that she didn't know were going to be smelly, and she used them outside of the fume hood, which is where you're supposed to use all,
faux pas.
Huge faux pas. And, it wasn't like that subtle because everyone could smell that these chemicals were being used.
Right.
In the place where they weren't supposed to. And so her solution was just to like ethanol everything everywhere to try to get the smell away, but that actually didn't end up working very well. And so now all these new lab mates that she had were just kind of looking at her like annoyed that she had done this. But apparently they were really nice about it. They helped her clean it up, told her she should probably use the fume hood next time, and she said she went home and slept the rest of the day. So I said that sounded like a good use of the rest of the day after that.
Then they gave her a nickname, Smelly Effie.
Smelly Effie. And that was how she got her story. No, I don't know.
That's always really unfortunate because that smell takes a long time to go away too.
Yeah.
Even when you do it in the fume hood, if you like accidentally get it on yourself, it's just like this terrible stench.
Exactly. I believe, don't quote me because I'm no microbiologist, but I believe they were short chain fatty acids. So if you're using any of those, PSA to keep them in the fume hood.
Fume hood that stuff.
Do it.
Or if you're just like really smelly one day, just like sit in the fume hood.
Yeah, put yourself in there. If you
Yeah.
didn't shower,
PhD life is hard. You don't always have time to shower.
You don't.
But just, you have time to sit in the fume
Do
hood.
everyone a favor. You know where you belong.
You eat too much cheese for lunch? Fume hood.
Did you accidentally bring some roasted garlic in fume hood?
Accidentally step in goose poop on your walk to class? Fume hood.
That's what they're made for, right?
I think. I'm no microbiologist, but I think I know how to use a fume hood. A fume hood.
Thanks for joining us today on our episode of Boom. If you'd like to reach out with a research fail, any comments, questions, or suggestions for how to make Boom better, please contact us at biomechanicsonOurminds@gmail.com.
And you can follow the International Society of Biomechanics on Twitter at ISBiomechanics or on Facebook at the International Society of Biomechanics. You can also follow me personally on Twitter at @MelissaBoswell_.
Or me, Hannah O'Day, at JohanPing.
And special thank you to Peter Washington for creating the music for Boom.
Biomechanics off our minds. Is that right?
I don't know.
How do you say the word?
Saphinus or Saphinus.
Ooh.
So whatever you like.
Starts off?
Sure. Okay, actually, before we start off, is your last name, is it just Lou or Liu? How do you say it? It's going to be...
Lou is fine.
Lou is fine?
Yeah,
Okay, all right.
We want to be most accurate.
Yeah,
I probably can't even say it right.
Today we're here with a woman who cannot say her last
Pretty
name.
much.
Just kidding.